Dr. Babu, we start in 10 minutes. They are just about to reach. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so we'll start in 10 minutes. So we'll start in 10 minutes.
Yes, we can hear you. So we are waiting whenever you start.
One will start this talk now, for which we have been waiting. So Brooke is here with us, and with her is Sohini from the US Consulate. I think we just start off with Sohini from the US Consulate. I think. Okay. So am I audible now? Meghendra, can you hear us?
Yes.
नहीं अभी ना ना
Because this is
Yes.
Yes.
yeah, that's correct. Leena Di, can you hear us?
अभी भी दूर नहीं
Shromi, Shweta, Shantanu Di, can you hear us? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You're audible.
So we have
Yes, Tanvi, we can hear you.
our audiences, also some in-person audiences, and many people have joined over Zoom also. So we will not take much time and we will start. And I would also like to set the context with a little bit of data that I have. And then we will have Anita Ji from our Child Protection Division. She will just quickly share about the work that we are doing with children in Jharkhand. What the data says, because the issue is around internet abuse. So the data that we were looking at, it shows that there are 624 million internet users in India. And in the past decade, like in the preceding year, this number grew by 8% in the post-pandemic situation. And according to a UNICEF report, out of 3 internet users, 1 is always a child. And if you look at the Facebook statistics, children between 13 to 17 years old, they form 7% of users of Facebook. And if we talk about internet addiction, 47% adolescents were found to have moderate internet addiction, and 24% have high levels of internet addiction. And 53,000 cybersecurity issues were reported in India in 2017. So this is a little bit of data. And I would also request Meghendra to add on and also introduce himself. He is the Chief of Programs. I have done a little bit of introduction for him.
Well, thank you so much. And
We can't hear you.
You can't? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
No, I don't want to take any more time, and just wanted to thank for joining us and giving us an opportunity today to work towards something which Cine is already really concerned about. I hope we get to see some results after this discussion.
Meghendra, the sound is very faint. We can't hear you. Meanwhile, I think Anita Ji, you can share a little bit about our work with children while Meghendra is.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity for sharing the work what we do in CINI. So CINI basically, a Child in Need Institute basically works with a child-centered approach, and yeah. Hello. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
In our interventions, we follow CINI method, which is focused on the best interest of the child, and yeah, and CINI method is focused on building child-friendly communities, building child-friendly systems, and building child-friendly organizations. So while talking about child protections,
Anitaji, all of us can hear you properly. Please continue.
okay.
Yes.
So when talking about child protection, so in child protection, basically we work on preventive approach. So we work with the community to strengthen the community gatekeeping and family-based. Okay, online party. Yeah, yeah, actually there is a power failure in our office. So the participants who have joined here offline.
Yeah, Anita ji, can you hear us? Anita ji? Hello, Anita ji.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, Aditya, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
Anita ji,
yes.
please continue. We can hear you.
Yes. Yes, Aditya, I can hear you.
When do we start?
So my name is Shonini and I work at the US
Yes.
consulate in Kolkata.
Yes,
And we look after 11 states in the east and northeast, and Jharkhand is obviously one of them. We've been coming to Jharkhand for quite some time now. And, you know, this is one of the states where we've been able to really work well with partners. I know Tanvi, by the way, from a long time, and I know that she's a passionate child rights activist. So when we thought of bringing Brooke here, I thought of reaching out to her. So thank you very much for helping organize this at City. So I mean, you must have seen her bio. I don't want to go all over it, but Brooke is from the US. She's a digital expert And she's got a long years of experience in actually working in the cyberspace on child protection issues with with a very well-known organization in the US called HORN, which many of you may have heard about. She's been involved in some very interesting research, worked with law enforcement, worked with civil society organizations, worked with the community at large on looking at this issue, developing models, developing systems as to how to combat it. The numbers which Tanvi gave were serious, but some of it is much more serious in what has happened in the space during the pandemic time. And I was amazed myself when she said, but that was of course data from the US, which she shared at one of our conclaves in end July this year, is a lot of the children getting affected or are actually being abused, actually very, very young. We generally don't tend to think that. We tend to think of this as a more teenage thing, but she was giving them like 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, which is pretty shocking. So I think this is something across borders that we feel as organizations we can work together. There are challenges to technology that we feel is happening now, but there are also many advantages of working on technology together. So with that, I want to thank all of you. Thank you for waiting. The weather is not very conducive today, so a little more traffic, and we hope we can set this okay. Over to you. Thank you.
Now I'll sit if that's okay, because if I stand, we can't.
Yeah, I think you can sit.
Yes, this is perfect,
Okay.
but it's just that can we hear her voice? We can check that one.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we will have to. Yes,
Any thumbs up?
Sujoyda, Shomi, can anybody give us a thumbs up?
Yes, everything is fine.
Shomi, you can hear us?
Yes, Tanvidi, you're clearly audible.
Oh,
Okay,
thumbs up. All right,
thanks.
great. Well, thank you all for having me today. It's an honor to be here. But today I'd like to start it off with a story, actually. A girl named Riley, who is 12 years old. She's shy. She's a really good student. And she has a small group of friends. She also just started middle school and just got her first phone. And now she's on a day and night on apps like Snap, TikTok, Instagram, hanging out and chatting with her friends. Jake is a handsome 8th grader. I'm not sure what grade that would be here, but that's middle school in the United States. And he's in her drama class. And they recently started texting back and forth. And after a few weeks, Jake asked Riley to send him a cute picture. So she takes the fun selfie and she sends it to him. They keep chatting and he asks her to send him something more sexy. She's hesitant at first, but eventually he pressures her to send a naked photo or nude, and she sends it. Now Jake then turns around and shares it with one of his buddies, who then turns around and shares it in a group chat. And then, of course, it starts spreading all around the school. And as her image spreads, Riley is in an all-out panic. She's devastated by Jake's betrayal. She feels humiliated and ashamed. And she is embarrassed for having believed him in the first place. She can't tell her parents because she knows they'll be furious with her. And frankly, she's far too mortified. Her image continues to spread and eventually it breaks outside of the bounds of the school into the community and starts circulating online. Back at school, messages swirl around, calling her a slut and all sorts of names. At home, she's becoming withdrawn and depressed. Her parents want to know what's wrong, but she just pushes them away. She's obsessively checking her phone, trying to contact the platforms to get them to take the images down, but she can't contain the spread. She just wants to hide from the world and make it stop. Now, our story today started with just two middle schoolers who were flirting, and they exchanged some images that were eventually reshared without consent. But there are other types of harmful situations that are rooted in these same motivations and behaviors that happen online as well. You all might be familiar with. One is online grooming, which is where an adult perpetrator befriends a child, sometimes pretending to be someone their same age, coerces them to send images or to meet up in person, or undress in a live stream. There's another phenomenon called capping, which is when someone records or takes a screen capture of welcome. It's a traffic day. Sorry, I'm stuck. No worries. Very sure. Okay. So we talked about grooming. The second one is capping, which is when someone non-consensually records or takes screenshots of a live stream and then shares that with people online without consent. And then any of these situations, Riley and Jake's grooming or capping, can escalate into what's called sextortion, where an online abuser or even a partner threatens to expose sexual images or blackmail the child if they don't give that person what they want, which can be sometimes money. There are rings of perpetrators online that do sextortion for money, more explicit or abusive images, to meet up in person, or even coerce into a trafficking situation. And unfortunately, these types of situations are more common than we might realize. There was a study done by the We Protect Global Alliance last year that you might be familiar with, where they studied over 5,000 18 to 20-year-olds around the world. And about 54% of those they surveyed had experienced at least one harmful online sexual encounter during childhood, 54%. In the US, for the US respondents, that went up to 71%. And in South Asia, it was around 50% kids had experienced a harmful sexual situation, online situation in childhood. But as scary as these stats and these situations may sound, the truth is today kids are navigating normal developmental stages and complicated stages like puberty with cameras, the internet, and digital devices in their hands. And it raises the bar because the internet is never forgetting. And I don't know about you all, but growing up, every single one of the risks I took and every mistake I made wasn't documented and shared for all the world to see. So it's a complicated thing for kids to navigate. But the truth is, a lot of what they're experiencing is developmentally normative behavior. So these types of situations are likely going to happen to any child that's connected to the internet. Either them or their friends, they're going to come across tricky situations online. We just have to prepare them for it. So I want to spend the rest of my time today talking about how we do that. So as was mentioned, I spent the last 8 years working for an organization called Thorn. We're a tech nonprofit based in the United States. And we build technology to fight online child sexual abuse. So it's our job to know the dark side of the internet as it pertains to child sexual exploitation. And we build software for law enforcement and for tech companies. And then my team builds tools for children and families to fight back against online abuse and create a safer space for children. And my team has spent the last 4 years conducting quite a bit of research specific to the US, but I do think a lot of it would apply globally, because what we did is we focused on understanding the children. We surveyed thousands of kids aged 9 to 17 across the United States to really understand how they felt about technology. What were their online habits? What were their motivations? How do they feel about these different situations, to really understand what vulnerability were being tapped into, and then figure out what type of programming we could develop to address those vulnerabilities. And so I just want to share like kind of some of the most important things that we've learned studying this over the last few years. And the first thing I would say is that we found it was happening a lot younger than we thought. We started a program called No Filter, and we put educational videos on TikTok, Instagram, Snap, and YouTube. And we try to start a dialogue about these issues to open up the conversation with youth online. And one of the questions that was asked in one of the videos was, how old were you the first time you were asked for a nude? And it went viral. This particular video went viral over and over again, with youth online putting in the comments how old they were the first time it happened to them. We had over 20 to 30,000 youth respond in comments telling us what had happened to them. And I'll read a couple just to give you a feel. I was like 12 and he was 30. I didn't understand about the age thing at the time. Another one said, I was 9 and he was 14. 9 and I'm a guy. First asked at 11, first sent at 12. And it was because I felt like I had to, because the guy was guilt tripping me. I was naive and caved. Others commented 7, 8, 6. We saw across the age range of when this happened to people. But when we looked at the stats from our own research, about 1 in 5 9 to 12-year-olds reported having had a sexual interaction with someone they believed to be an adult. And 1 in 6 had actually shared their own nude image. And while, you know, every child is different in terms of the device access they get and their development, we do know that starting around ages 7 and 8, kids start to be really curious about their bodies. It's also at that age that they're very interested in imitating older children and adults. So when you layer these natural developmental needs in with cameras and unfettered access to all manner of people online, it puts them in situations they're just fundamentally unprepared to handle. And while we do talk a lot and know a lot about how girls are vulnerable to these crimes online, we found that boys actually had some unique vulnerabilities. Our research showed that 27% of 9 to 12-year-old boys report having used an adult dating app. And boys were actually 2 times as likely to report having had an online-only friend over the age of 30 compared to girls. And it was also interesting that 9 to 12-year-old boys of all the age groups were the most likely to be recontacted after either blocking or reporting someone they only knew online. So they had a tendency to be attempted to be re-victimized over some of the other age groups. So it's happening younger than we think. The second thing to be aware of is that as kids get older and they start getting access to social media and more kind of independent time online, we found that online interactions have very different boundaries than offline. And that can create a lot of confusion and vulnerability. So, you know, whether it's sexting with a crush or flirting with adults online, those boundaries were very different and tricky with technology, particularly when it came to age gaps. And we found that categories like stranger and friend don't translate to kids, because even though they met someone online and they don't know them in person, we found those can be very deep friendships, and they share a lot with even online only friends that they've never met in real life. For a lot of kids, the internet is a place for them to explore, get outside their physical world, and connect with people around the world that have either common interests or play games with other people or meet friends or mutual friends. And this is a good thing, but they don't consider those people strangers. So if you think about Riley and Jake, so imagine, you know, Riley's 12. So imagine she met Jake online instead of at school, and he was a handsome 19-year-old or a 35-year-old. And the same type of dynamics of flirting and being interested in attention or being interested in someone liking you, those still exist even in an online space. And that age gap doesn't translate in those situations. And our research also showed that for many kids, for a lot of kids, they view chatting and flirting with adults online as normal. For a lot of them, it's kind of the first time to experience kind of the freedom and independence from adult supervision, and it's exciting. And, you know, with those tween and teenage years they're naturally wired to take risks and to want to establish that independence. And so it creates a really kind of risky dynamic. We did find, though, that as flirtatious interactions escalated to sexual ones, about half of kids that had shared their own nudes shared them with someone that they only knew online, they never met in real life. And 41% believe they were sharing them with an adult. And you all work in this child protection space, so you know that adults will always have intellectual and emotional advantages over children. So it makes this dynamic really risky for the kids that are involved. We also found that because online relationships are so deep for children, even when things start to shift or an online relationship goes south or turns abusive, a lot of times it's hard for them to cut off contact because they're already deeply invested and attached. So the final kind of learning from the research that I want to share, and maybe one of the most important ones, and I believe you all can appreciate this, is that we found that shame is the biggest obstacle for kids getting help when they need it. So whether it was a consensual nude that was shared without consent, or an online stranger who became a friend who then turned into an abuser, it's that shame and embarrassment that keeps them silent in those moments when they need it the most. These online situations, I think online activities in general maybe have a level of shame regardless, but you add that kind of sexual layer and they can cause an intense amount of humiliation and shame, as we saw on the story with Riley. And in stories like Riley's and others, it can lead to self-harm, depression, and suicide if there's not interventions. And that's why it's so important that kids know that they can get help when things start to go sideways. I'll share a quote from one of it was a 14-year-old sextortion victim from our research. She said, "It made me feel worthless. Everyone at school pegged me as a slut because of some weak moments. It made me very depressed. I honestly thought suicide was the answer for a while." And our research showed about 85% of sextortion victims actually reported that embarrassment was the reason that they didn't reach out to family and friends for help. And actually, we found that it's for good reason, unfortunately, because more than 50% of both kids and adults that we surveyed mostly exclusively blame the child in the photo and a nude image. So there's this kind of culture of shame and blame, and it's no doubt a complicated subject, but there's a culture of shame that comes with it that really makes it difficult for kids to get help when they need it. Now I know this is a lot and maybe kind of a tough topic, but there's so much that we can do to help in these situations. The first one I would say is that we need to equip younger kids. We have to start educating children earlier about digital safety, about how to keep themselves safe online. We know that they're starting to have, if they have device access, and especially unsupervised, they're having to deal with these situations as early as 7, 8, and 9. And we also know that from an intervention perspective, the early years are some of the most critical times to intervene, because it's when kids are actually open to listening to adults still. And it's a time when we can really make an impact by equipping them with knowledge. So at that age, it's about teaching them about how common it is that it happens, that it's not the child's fault when something happens, and starting to build their skills to refuse and have boundaries when things make them uncomfortable online. So the first thing is to equip younger kids. The second thing is as kids get older and start having access to more spaces online and start having online relationships, is to encourage healthy online relationships. And the truth is that a lot of the dynamic that happens online in terms of what's healthy and not healthy is similar to healthy and unhealthy aspect offline. So consent, boundaries, respecting other people's information, respecting other people's privacy. And a lot of these skills, at least in the United States and maybe here too, they're actually taught in health class in schools. And so given that children's relationships are online and offline now, we just need to bring that digital lens into the health class and talk about those same dynamics and same skills that we're teaching in health class. Teach it about what it looks like in the digital space, what it looks like to have a boundary, what it looks like to say no, what abuse looks like, what
Let me try it. Can you hear me now?
I think this is the best audio now. Great. Sorry, guys.
All right.
This is
Okay. Okay. Great. Should I start over? Just kidding.
No. It's all right.
Yeah. So we were talking about removing the shame. And the way we do that is by having conversations. It's important that parents, teachers, the adults in kids' lives start talking about these issues and bring it up so that kids know nothing is off limits with us. Because if we don't talk about it, they're going to automatically assume that they can't come forward. And it's about the way we have these conversations too. It's about having them with empathy and understanding so that they know if something goes wrong, that we won't get angry with them. I know, like, as adults, for us, these topics can be really difficult, and in an effort to try to protect our kids and tell them about the risks of these things, we say things like, don't share nudes or don't share sexual images, because if it gets out, it'll be your fault. Or you shouldn't have sent them in the first place. And while we do need to let them know the risks, what that does is that unintentionally puts the harmful actions of others puts the blame on their shoulders. Because what did they do? They trusted someone that they shouldn't have. They took a risk, which is normal for their age and stage of development. But the person that did something wrong was either the partner or the perpetrator that reshared their image or tricked them or broke their trust. So it's important that we stay centered in that and how we have conversations with kids and make sure we just tell them over and over, it's never their fault if someone breaks their trust or tricks them online, because they're automatically going to blame themselves unless we start to change that dialogue about these issues. And for folks that youth serving adults or teachers, educators, parents, we have to be mindful. It's a very nuanced, difficult subject, but we have to be mindful of how we approach it and approach it with empathy and understanding. Because the most important thing, the harm happens and perpetrators count on kids feeling isolated and alone. And the harm happens when they can't get help in those moments. For policymakers, I think it's important to think about victims, even that maybe don't seem like victims, in the center of any policies that are developed. And also it's important for law enforcement to be sensitive to the context of a situation where a naked image was shared, whether it was grooming or consensually in the first place or otherwise, that there's greater context to take into account. So equip younger kids, build their online relationship skills and remove shame. And I think what we're really hoping for here is kind of a different version of Riley's story, right? So imagine that if her parents and teachers had talked about these issues, that it was talked about regularly, and she felt confident they would be understanding. Of course, she would still try to handle it herself at first because she's a teenager, almost a teenager. She would have tried, but eventually when things started spreading and spiraling out of control, she would have asked an adult for help. And they would have asked if she was okay and asked her how she wanted to handle it and worked with her to report the images and get them taken down. They would also help her have a bigger perspective, which is so important in that moment, because as a child, you think that's your whole world and your whole world is ending. So help her to zoom out, have a bigger perspective that this singular moment, this singular misstep or risk doesn't define her for the rest of her life, and help her have hope to get to the other side, because she will need that in that moment. Now, on the other hand, what if one of Jake's friends had done something different? What if one of his friends had been taught by his teachers and his parents that it's wrong to reshare people's private information? So instead of forwarding the image, he called out his friends in the group chat. Every single one of these shifts in perspective and culture can have a drastic effect on how harmful imagery is spreading. And even more ideal, what if the kids at Riley School were raised to believe that a reshared image or nude said more about the resharer than the person in the image? Now, she would have been embarrassed still, I mean, who wouldn't? But instead of being shamed, her friends and her family would have come around her to build that network of support, to remove her shame and build her resilience. So the world we're hoping for is a world where kids are able to explore, they're able to make mistakes, because we're preparing them with the skills they need to navigate those situations, but we're also laying this foundation of support and trust so they can get help when they need it. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you have any questions, whoever,
If you have any questions.
yeah.
Oh, I would love to hear what you all are seeing in terms of online trends with children, or what you're facing in the work that you do, because you all are on the front lines of working with children.
Yeah. So that is what we were discussing, that we are not into this issue per se. We are working with children, but this is actually a more urbanized issue, and we are working with the rural communities. But this work, this discourse has started coming in, especially during this post pandemic time. And when even in rural areas, digital education was being done, and not many children could access digital education, but there is an increased population of internet and smartphones in rural areas also post pandemic and also during the pandemic. So, so we don't have evidences on how, all this has impacted children, especially in the rural areas. But yes, we are aware that this is one issue that has, huge scope of, intervention, especially in the civil societies. And if anybody here wants to, share anything, it can also be, it may not be related to your work. If there is any, you are like, she's a teacher, she's a, yeah. So if there are any reflections.
I have something if someone else wants. Why don't you start off? Maybe people are waiting for someone to start. First, apology, I'm late. Something went wrong, so I'm late. I'm actually from Rural Management Program at SISS, Civil Institute of Social Service. I'm into more academics, what I can say. I'm dealing a paper, Women and Child Development, Child Rights, Child Issues, Child Protection. So after listening you, I have some ideas which I keep on discussing in my class. What Tanvi has also said, not much of specific research I have done, but some of the cases which we deal in our classes and all. I just wanted to make 2 notes which came to my mind apart from what you have said. It's complete, everything is there. But just wanted to add on 2 things. First is we need to locate the person also who is doing that. So it may not be always child versus child. It may be child versus adult also. Yeah? So there is high chance that a child has been exploited by an adult, not by a child itself. So the person who is at the second party, that side, that need to be dealt specifically, because it may be that the another side person is not dealing with this individual only. There may be other also.
And it can be worse.
It can
go into forms of trafficking.
Absolutely. So that is what I am thinking right now, that it's really a very interesting topic to think about. What she said, digital literacy is a positive part. Everybody has got these phones in their hand, but this is a negative part, what you are talking about. So we can think about something in the context of the person who is the exploiter. I can say this word. And that too in 2 different domains, one which is a minor, a child versus child, and one where we can have somebody as an adult who is maybe leading towards trafficking, child porn, anything it could be. So this is one thing which I am thinking.
Child porn, by the way, I mean, all of us know, and India is one of the biggest consumers of
and
child porn.
this whole market, I guess, I'm a student of economics. So I'm saying this word market is booming like anything, because the profit ratio is very high, revenue is very high. So it's booming like this so much. This is one thing which I want to see. The second part which came to my mind, as I'm a teacher, so we always think that parents and teacher can be the 2 important stakeholders who can groom a child. But in spite of being a teacher, I can share this with my personal experience. Among teacher also, we need to do a kind of scaling or sensitization, or we need to locate people who are really sensitive towards it. Because this is something which is very sensitive, people should come forward. I can give a simple example from my daughter's only, she's in class 7. The moment they see somebody entering in the counseling room, now they make a story. Mama, you know that girl entered in the counseling room. That means there is some problem. So that's also a challenge, a taboo. A child actually feels hesitant entering in that counseling room many times, because they know the moment I enter, many of my friends are seeing it and they will make a story about it, that there is something wrong. So what you say, shame now is everywhere. So we need to break it on different platforms. So we need to do the sensitization of teachers. We need to highlight some teachers who are really sensitive towards this issue, and then we can make them as a specific stakeholders to deal with this, not a generalized all the teachers, because everybody can't be sensitive on the same platform. Right. So these are my 2 observations which I just wanted to add on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think they're very good observations. And definitely the adult online perpetrator is very much a part of the equation. I think what's interesting is that a lot of the dynamic with the peer is the dynamic with the adult. One, they might be pretending to be a peer, but two, the reason why a child engages with an adult is because there's attention and there's a whole grooming cycle, right? That pours on the attention that gets the child attached to them. So it's all very intentional, but it's the same root kind of desires in the child that they want to connect with the peer, or, you know what I mean? It's the same needs that are being met. And in terms of child sexual abuse material, part of the reason why we started this work was about 3 or 4 years ago. We started to hear from law enforcement that what's called self-generated child sexual abuse material, which is what we were talking about today, like anytime an adult perpetrator is not in person, but it's internet enabled, it's through grooming or sextortion, or somehow images are getting exchanged, that self-generated type of content was the fastest growing type of CSAM circulating online. And we heard in this last year that it might be the majority now, because to your point, like no longer does the perpetrator have to be in the child's school or in the child's family. Like the second they connect online, it removes that natural geographic physical protection, actually. So it puts like not only the children that happen to live or be in the same community as an offender in harm's way, it puts all children, because that accessibility is different. So it's just 100% agree with everything you said. It's very, very important.
One question out of curiosity. Talking about consent, as you have mentioned, the consent is very important while we taking pictures. But I was wondering that how much consent is actually helpful in preventing, these kind of abuses, internet online abuses, because it's all about reaching that trust. Because even if I'm making friendship, or even if I'm making some good connections over the internet, and everything is going well, and after some point of time, if something happens, out of revenge also, this kind of instance happens. So even if I give my consent, okay, I have my consent and you can have my picture, but after some point of time, there can be issues with those relationships. So how much consent is important actually helping preventing this kind of instances?
That is a great question. I think it's about changing the mindset that consent isn't only about the first person, but I didn't consent to you sharing it, right? So, right, you can't. It's out of their control. But I think consent, the way I see consent factoring into prevention is that if we teach our children that their picture, even if they've shared it with someone, it's still their picture, and it's not that person's right to share it, that shifts the weight of blame to the person that reshared their picture without consent. And I think that's part of the conversation that's not happening now, so that the child feels like it's their fault for having shared it in the first place. And practically speaking, they put themselves at risk.
Yes.
But it's still not okay for that person to reshare without consent. And so I think bringing that mindset, teaching that, and teaching boys and girls at young ages, like it's not okay to reshare without consent. Like if we bake that into their mentality, then I think it starts to shift the blame culture, the shame culture, because then that person's wrong for having reshared my image without consent versus I'm wrong. Does that make sense? It's very kind of nuanced and complex, but I think it's shifting. You're right, you can't control.
I'm thinking because, this is such an area where, it's like, you don't even know what is right and what is wrong. And that's an interesting question. But I'm also thinking that how much of that minor's consent actually matters, right? How much does, she or he actually know, right? At that point, they're thinking it's okay to share and yes, I'm giving you my image, but is that consent even valid? I'm just thinking of that age.
Mostly at that at this point of age, people are into a new fantasy world.
Yes.
Making new connections,
Yes.
wondering new things, exploring new things. So these small things gets ignored, and therein these kinds of,
There was a online video. It's a very interesting conversation about consent, and once you've shared, there was a video because it goes to revenge porn and all that, where it was on TikTok, of course, and this woman's like, "All right, I have a sandwich, and I give you a sandwich because I'm sharing my sandwich with you. Like, is it okay for you to take my sandwich and share it with someone else? No, like I am sharing it with you. I didn't say you could take it and share it with everyone else." So it's an ongoing, I think, social conversation about imagery and who owns it, once you put it out into the world.
It's Facebook and social media that's not there. Who takes whose consent?
Right. But I think
sharing around.
private situations maybe are a little bit different, but yeah, it's a very, I think, broader social question that we're all trying to kind of work through.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking that opening a profile in FB, Insta, or somewhere, I think for that it is required to be 18 years. So any child, I think of 12, 13 also clicks it. Yes, so they click it that it's 18 and they're entering. I think
This is 13.
yeah, I'm just like that only. I'm not about it. Yes. So that even if keeping that clause there, that it has to be 18 plus, doesn't actually put any relevance to this whole. Anybody can open without having that particular age bracket.
Yeah, I think it's 13 for most platforms, but I mean, kids are always lying about their age.
Yeah. Always.
One thought from my side regarding the rural context, specifically if I can say for Jharkhand also. Though they don't have, all of them don't have the access of the individual mobiles, but there is a group of children who sit together and watching videos and everything, and they don't have any parental control because of that, their parental generation, they are not aware about the using of the mobile, what is that, so they are very much free to, for us, we can control at a limit, okay, the child is seeing that or which is there in their screen, but for rural countries, this is a very major issue because parents, the generation of parents, they don't have any kind of knowledge on that.
These children may be first
Yeah.
generation.
So this is a major challenge, and how to address that, this is for that context, how to reach out to that parents, those who don't have any ability till now to access that phone, at least the smartphone. So how they can control their children and they can take care of that. That is one of the major questions in context of rural Jharkhand or rural India that I can see.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So believe it or not, that same issue is in the United States. Because parents, we've done a lot of research with parents too. So whether it's an issue for me, I have 9 to 4 ages, I have 3 boys. Even if parents have had some digital life, it's nothing compared to what the kids that grow up, right?
Yeah.
So we call it the digital divide, and it's creating this kind of gap in communication between parents and children, and not to mention that technology is a great babysitter, and so parents lean into it. I do the same myself, right? So there's this digital divide where like parents don't know, so they don't, they just kind of give the device and they don't talk about it. And then kids feel like their parents don't understand their lives. And so it's this gap. And what we know from like general prevention research and any type of kind of child safeguarding and public health, that parents are a huge protective factor. The relationship with the parent is a huge protective factor. So something that we're focused on, and we launched a parent resource, which I can share with you all, is focused on just getting parents to start a conversation with their child, even if they don't know the tech. Like, they don't have to know the tech to like talk to their child, to say, hey, has anyone ever made, or just like, what game were you playing? Or have you seen anything online that scared you? Or have you seen anything online that bothered you? Or has anyone ever made you uncomfortable online? Like you can have this open, that opens the dialogue so that if things that get you in unsupervised spaces, if children encounter unsafe things, they know that their parent is open to talking about it because they've opened that conversation. So it's a problem right now between the generations in general, and
I think this is not only for the online thing, but the offline also. The same dialogue, the same conversation is being needed for specifically for the rural Jharkhand area where parents are not able to connect with the children, those who are in the adolescent age, and they are seeing that fantasy world and reaching out to outer world and all. So this is applicable for not only online, I think for the context of Jharkhand, it's very much important for the offline communication also.
Yes.
Because everyone is trafficking everything that is going on offline also. The number of cases, not only online, but the offlines are very much related. So in both of the contexts.
Yeah.
Just to add to her, I work for the adolescents here in Jharkhand, and this adolescent period is the age of sexual awakening, right? And also on the same side, we see that talking about sex and sexuality within the family or in the community, it's something which is very much stigmatized and scrutinized, right? So I take one step back rather than going to the online platform, what's happening there. So it's very much required that we break the silence and in the community, we talk about it. There is a point where we talk about, as you know, India is very much believes in customs, traditions and all that. How much within this age group, say 15 to 19, when this transition is happening fast and rapid in our adolescence, how much we should talk about it. There have been instances in schools, this life skill education have been introduced, but unfortunately, it could not continue the way it has been thought of. So it's time to talk about it. And there comes, as you said in your presentation also, that to educate the kids. So it's not just kids, also as a our community, the parents, they need to open up to take up this discussion. So I think that creates a platform where we talk about more freely. Otherwise, if at all a child comes across this, the shame, the inhibitions all comes. So the more we keep it in the closet, the more it spreads.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the research we did a study with parents, and we asked them if they'd had conversations about sexting or online grooming with their kids. And if they had, like why, like what prompted the conversation? And a large percentage of the conversations were initiated by the child. Like the child's having to bear the weight of coming to their parents because the parent, well, they weren't thinking about it, right? But to your point, we need to, as adults, community leaders, like we need to be the ones to open that dialogue more broadly because not every child is going to have the courage to come to their parent in those situations. And we need to take that weight off of their shoulders. Yeah.
Also, I feel that at the policy level, I'm not sure about other countries, but in India, I feel at the policy level also, we must be initiating and orienting teachers, parents, and students, because they must be aware of what they are going into, the pros and cons. Maybe if that is kind of constantly done for them and in a more structured way, like breaking into the curriculum discussions, having debates or talking it over the table, these things more talked about probably might, make them, remove that taboo. And also their sense of questioning should always be encouraged. They should have the ability to question again and again, and the teacher, the community engager, or the parent must be welcoming their questions. They must not be dismissed. I think when we encourage and do it in a constant practice, probably that might, I won't say it would completely, kind of evade the situation, but probably might minimize the situation. It might not be that volatile.
Yes, agreed. I think how teachers,
I think as teachers, even I don't know whether all teachers are aware aware about these things? Are they conscious about cyberbullying or internet exploitations? So there should be policy level orientations, discussions, and should be put on paper at all levels. Whether if I'm a teacher, I'm going to engage myself with a class 6 to 12, which has a varied age group. I must be able to handle those kids in that context. And I should be very much in sync with their ethos as well. It should not be like a one kind of preaching going on wherein there's no conversation coming back in terms of feedback. So how well we can ease in the communication among the system is something that we must focus on. And it has to penetrate deep down because now with post-pandemic, everyone has a basic access to phones. And in the rural areas where internet is not that dominant, yet there are some level of cyber crimes happening. So we should have an understanding of the overall situation. And how can we give interventions phased manner is something that we need to work upon. I think that's what I could gauge.
Yeah, I agree.
I would also like to share what we are, just what we are doing on this a little bit. It's not directly on this, but like we are intervening, like Amit said, we are intervening with adolescent age groups, and we have a module called Spandan. I don't know, Spandan, what do we call it in English?
Vibrations.
Vibrations. Okay, ripples.
Ripples.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
So that module has a lot of sessions on, honing the communication skills, empathy, understanding self. So when you start these conversations with them, they understand what they are. They see their identity as not just their name, but what they want in life. So when you start having these conversations with them and they go back and have these conversations with their parents, so that communication, it starts happening. And we have, documented that change. We were doing this program on gender-based violence in schools. And there we had found out that one major reason of increased violence at school level was that there was very little conversation between children and their parents. So when they went back home, they never talked about anything, not only violence. There was no communication between parents and children. So we started having these, monthly structured sessions with adolescents, and it has proven to, show results in terms of, like if I am a boy and my friend is being abused or some violence is happening, as a bystander, I will stand up and intervene. So these changes started coming in, and even the government has recognized this way of working. I think Farida, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
I translate what she said.
Okay.
मुझे एक्चुअली जब पेडोग्राफी का काम करते हैं तो अभी जैसे सर ने पता आमी सर ने और मैम ने बताया कि जो हम लोग बहुत सारी सोसाइटी के इश्यूज हैं, जैसे कि पीरियड्स को लेके जब बात करते हैं तो लड़की इतनी अनकंफर्टेबल फील करके आपस में करके बात करके ओपन होती ही नहीं है। और ऑनलाइन जो इश्यूज के बारे में हम लोग बात करें और जो यूज के बारे में, उसके ऊपर जितना वो लोग रिएक्ट करें, जितना वो खुल के बातचीत करेंगे, उसको समझेंगे, ये बहुत दूर की बात है, क्योंकि अभी हम लोग बहुत छोटे छोटे इश्यूज की बात करते हैं, वो ओपन अप नहीं हो पाते। So maybe you can take me to breaks. So what she's saying is that when we go to the field, I mean, can be an urban or a rural city, and we interact with adolescent girls, there are pretty some issues like menstruation hygiene or something related to, let's say, sex education. They become so uncomfortable to talk about it, and when we try to educate them, they just become shy and start bubbling up among themselves. So it's become very difficult to make them open up, teach them, and make them aware. And when it's come to this online issues about sexual abuse or harassment, which is happening online, it is something which will maybe we'll start doing that, but it will really take time to make them understand, open up. That's what she's saying and what she's trying.
Yeah.
फैमिली को पीरियड्स को लेके उनका ही बहुत सारा ट्रबल्स है, मतलब कि अचार नहीं छूना है या फिर किचन में जाना है, ये सारी चीजों को लेके वो एक्सेप्ट नहीं कर पाते हैं कि ऑनलाइन सेक्सुअल एक्टिविटीज वो पहले मोबाइल छीन लेंगे और उसकी तरह बंद करवा देंगे, यही करने वाली हूँ या फिर ऐसे ही हमारे दिमाग में चल रहा है तो फिर लेटर इस तरीके का ये निकल के आएगा।
So what she's saying that if the family will come to know that whether she is into some kind of relationship with a guy through online or something happened like that, maybe they are sharing each other photos. So already families are more into taboos, related to small things. So if they come to know that sometimes the parents give their mobile to their children for digital education. So if they will come to know that she is up to more this online relationships and all. So here in India, parents are very strict about it. They are not so open up. So if they come to know, they will just snatch the phone from the child and some other way they will make them stop to go to school as they are more into, and maybe that can lead to their marriage as well. So that can extend also to what she's mentioning.
एक और चीज है कि हम लोग जितना इसको अवेयरनेस के ऊपर लेके जाए, इससे अच्छा है कि टेक्नोलॉजी इतना फास्ट ग्रो कर रहा है, हम लोग टेक्नोलॉजी का कुछ रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगा सकते हैं, जैसे कि नेट फोटो किसी भी तरीके से अपलोड करना, कोई भी तरीके का कोई अवेयरनेस जनरेट करने के लिए नेट फोटो तो नहीं लगाएगा। तो डेफिनेटली हम टेक्नोलॉजी में ऐसा कुछ सिस्टम डेवलप कर दे कि नेट फोटो ले ही ना हो, एक्सेप्ट ही ना करे, चाहे वो कंसेंट हो कंसेंट ना ही हो, वहां भी अगर रिस्ट्रिक्शन हम लोग कर देते हैं। इवन जैसे कि अभी व्हाट्सएप में हमारा है कि प्राइवेट कुछ अगर पर्सन भेज रहे हैं तो एक ही पर्सन देख लेगा और कुछ मिनट में गायब हो जाएगा, तो वो नहीं देख पाएगा। ऐसा कुछ कर सकते हैं क्योंकि सभी को समझाना कि फोटोज मत शेयर करो ये बहुत टफ है। ये हम लोग आहिस्ते आहिस्ते कर लेंगे जब हम लोग उस तरीके के मतलब अवेयरनेस के मोड में आ जाएंगे या फिर सारे लोग तैयार रहेंगे कि हाँ वो इस तरीके की चीजों को ले सकते हैं, इतना ओपन है। तो इट्स बेटर कि टेक्नोलॉजी में ही हम लोग वो चीजें इंक्लूड कर दें ताकि कोई अगर नेट को शेयर भी करता है तो वो 1% जो बंदा है वो देखिए जस्ट वो गायब हो जाए। और ये चीजें बहुत जल्दी हम लोग लेते हैं, मतलब जितने यंग लोग हैं इन चीजों को आपको सिखाने की जरूरत नहीं है, वो देखते और करते मतलब करते करते वो सीख लेते हैं। तो इसको आपको अवेयरनेस की भी जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी, वो बहुत फास्ट ले लेते हैं इन चीजों को। और वो
जैसे फेसबुक का प्रोफाइल पिक एंड व्हाट्सएप प्रोफाइल पिक, और so many times your status also nobody can take a screenshot. So these technological supports are there.
What she's saying that we can simultaneously go with doing awareness with sort of thing with the parents and the child, but it is also very important as the artificial agency is growing so much. Our apps are getting updated and new versions are coming. Why can't we give some kind of filters which can detect the new pictures? Because basically more sexual harassment happened through these pictures only. Definitely the verbal abuse is there, but this is the more subtle thing which is cannot be accepted by anyone, right? So she's saying that if some kind of photo, this kind of photo is being shared, can we have some kind of artificial intelligence on this which can detect this kind of photo and stop any person of sharing this at any platform? So that is something can be done. And adding to that, what she said when we are discussing that awareness is fine. We need to do it. We have to do it. But the person who are perpetrator or the person who have this intention of doing sexual abuse, awareness will not work on all those. And they are having intention of that only, and that's why they are doing and repeatedly doing that. So technology need to play because we are also having our cyber cells. No. They are so much into looking after a lot of criminal activities which are going around borders or terrorism to stop that. Maybe this can be a priority also for them to look into that matter. What she knows.
Yep. I think on platforms there are technologies that detect child sexual abuse material. Apple at the end of last year implemented something like that in text messages. So for families that have a family plan, parents can enable, it's called communication safety on their child's phone, so that if it's a nudity detector, so it detects any naked photo. So it could be a naked selfie or just pornography that's being shared. But if the parent has enabled it, it detects it. And it doesn't stop it, but it puts up prevention messaging, like, are you sure you want to do this? You can't control it after you send it, or if they're receiving it, like this person might not have intended for you to, it has all this prevention messaging And then it offers them resources in that moment and encourages them to reach out to an adult for help. So it's an interesting model. I think they're the only ones that are doing it just on straight nudity. But a lot of companies do try to look for child sexual abuse material, but it's not as broad. I mean, ideally, it would be more than they're doing, but it's not as broad as any type of nude image yet.
Kind of any application you are talking about?
Is what?
iPhone.
It's an Apple only, but the problem is how many of our children are
And I
carrying
think it's
Apple.
like a bigger thing that she said, something very deep and more important.
deep.
And I think that is like, like you are basically, civil society has to have more of these conversations with the tech companies who are more geared towards profit, right? A lot of their, money making and profit motives would be compromised if they are continuously like what she said. And sometimes it's frustrating also, like, even when we as the consulate also, what they do is they have filters on words. So Facebook, even if we are trying to say something against human trafficking, the word is there, will not accept it and will not let us boost it. Like taking it down as a thing, as opposed to you're actually going to they don't understand that. They'll use just certain filters of the words. So maybe those conversations need to happen as to what kind of filters and how do you use it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it acts it just backfires.
Yes, that's a big challenge. It says is we have got Tamils and there are certain words, the moment you write it in the Google, it will show that you can't access. But the problem is I am teaching women and children. I need to work on abuses, sexual exploits. So the SEX will appear many times when I type. And then I get a message from the cyber side, why you are writing so many times this particular, and I am making it as a part of my academics. So allow me, so I have written a mail properly that allow me to use this word because I am teaching this paper and I need to use this word many times. And my students are also actually writing assignments, preparing term papers. So they are also typing the same word in their search engine. And then it becomes a challenge. They say if you can open it, it becomes difficult. If I close it down to a specific student, then also it's a problem. So it's really a problem. I agree with it totally.
Yeah, so but the idea is, creating that agency that this word should not become a taboo.
Yes, that's also important. It's not taboo actually.
The word is a taboo.
That's the problem.
This is a global issue, and every country are facing this challenge and having this. So, and since you are coming from having a global experience and coming from that background, any initiative or any innovation any country has done to prevent this thing, or any significant work has been done which you can share for us to learn and understand? Because this is a big issue as we see in the global world. Inter-country also this is happening. Any innovations, anything that you can share?
The issue of internet-enabled abuse or CSAM, child sexual abuse material in general?
Online internet sexual abuse.
Online, okay.
And if I can just add to his question, which is also going in my head. So India being the kind of country it is, given the socio-economic situation which we are living in, and in India also Jharkhand being a poor state, where literacy rate is not high, and a lot of children who are coming to our schools, particularly government schools, are first generation school goers. Contrast to this, the situation of US, which is seemingly relatively, I have not been there, but seemingly relatively more richer in terms of their economic status, in terms of the parents' literacy. So what is the situation like there? Because technology literacy has also a connection in itself. So how is the American society responding to this challenge? And it becomes a case because for us it is a developed state. A and B. And how the education system of the country is responding, because in India, even the government, I think, has recognized this as a challenge. And while we are talking about sensitizing teachers, not only from the civil society organizations, but also there are programs which are run by government institutions for sensitizing teachers. The success of these programs can be a different debate, but we are like moving ahead to that. So how is the society responding to it, and how is the education system responding to it? I don't know to that question.
Okay. Well, in the United States, I would say that we have quite a bit of programming in place for like sexual abuse prevention in general, elementary, middle school, and high school. But the digital piece is not consistently like rolled out. A lot of the education system is like state or county based. It's a little more decentralized. So there might be a greater opportunity in India for the government to have more of like a holistic impact on bringing digital safety education. We've worked with some curriculum developers in the United States, and I think the perception that it's too young to talk to kids under middle school is very much there. That's something we're advocating for. It doesn't even have to be about sex. It can be about not strangers, but like red flags, and it's okay to say no to something even after you've said yeah. Like there's things you can equip younger kids with. So we're still very much grappling with it in the United States in terms of widespread prevention in schools on the digital piece. It's kind of piecemeal right now. In terms of innovation that you were asking about, it's tough. I mean, a couple of programs that come to mind, Google has a program called Be Internet Awesome that's in a lot of schools, but it's game based. And I think it's maybe for like 5th grade and above. That's not particularly innovative. It's just a digital curriculum. I know that we were talking about this earlier. There's agencies in the UK that are focused on this engagement called Report Remove, which is setting up basically a hotline for kids to get support. Because if they don't feel like they can go to their parents or their teachers, them having like an anonymous, safe place where they can go to get support, to get their content taken down, to get emotional support in those moments. So that's happening in the UK, and it's starting to be made available in the US. So having kind of anonymous, non-familial resources for kids to tap into, I think is an interesting piece. I mentioned the innovation that Apple has now, and that's actually fairly progressive. And that's something that we're advocating for on other platforms. Like, how can we be more proactive on platforms? Because the platform actually might be the only person that a child tells or like indicates that something is going horribly wrong. If they block or they report, they may not tell anyone in their life, but they report to the platform. So the platform is the tech companies are in a unique position, thank you, to be able to be more proactive and serving, because it's kind of a black hole right now. Kids report and they don't hear anything back. So to have a more proactive and interactive, like here's resources for help, provide more help in those moments, or have more detection like the nudity detector or grooming detectors. So that's not on the weight of the child to protect themselves, but the whole community and the platforms are being more supportive. The last thing I'll say is that we, at Thorn, we did launch kind of a unique online intervention called No Filter a couple years ago that communicates directly on social with kids aged like 13 to 17. And it's very much, it's on TikTok, Snap, Instagram, YouTube, and it's not directly educational. It's asking a lot of questions. It's funny videos, and the purpose of it is to start an online dialogue with youth so we can kind of destigmatize the conversations among peers And that was the example I shared earlier where we asked like, who's at fault when someone's nudes are shared and there's the comments blow up with kids arguing about who's at fault or not, but it's starting to open up that conversation. So it's less kind of direct education and more kind of creating this broader support system by opening up the dialogue. So that would be a unique approach. I know the E-Safety Commissioner's Office in New Zealand is really progressive in terms of their resources, but unfortunately, I don't know that there's not like a perfect solution. I think we're all, technology is moving so fast, right? We're all trying to grapple with what it means to our society, what it means to our relationships, how we teach our children that are growing up online. So I think there's a lot more innovation to be done, frankly, but those are some things that come to mind. Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the cases, what? We can add on as one of the solutions, we can add on, I think, the self-learning tools like Instopedia, they're coming up with certain magazines, comic magazines, in which they talk about menstruation, hygiene. So a child need not to be told by anybody like parent and teacher. It's simply a magazine. It's distributed among the children. They can go through it.
I like the idea, and many people are doing it now, is that they will see cartoons, so bring out the message through comic strips, it's like just
or all those comic whole entertainment industry which is dependent on comics.
Because the other platform that is now, and I know like some of the cases that we've had, like informally, we don't deal with such cases, but we get to know the first contact is, of course, Facebook and all of that is, but also through playing. So like, playing. So you it's so easy. Online you're playing, right? Yeah. You don't know who it is. Yes. And they first start playing with you, and then you find them coming at the same time online. And after 2-3 weeks, they start chatting. And so it's more like, it's almost like somebody who's been your buddy, right? Yeah. Who's been playing with you, and then it goes.
Yep, absolutely. Games are, and we're actually
they'll be online at the same time. They start being online at the same time.
Actually, we're in conversations with some gaming companies. Gaming companies, I think, and companies in general are very interested in kind of prevention messaging and prevention interventions because they know that it's happening, and how can they kind of innovate.
PUBG was a big platform where this happened.
Yeah.
It's now banned, I think.
Yeah, it's banned.
PUBG.
Yeah, very popular game, but it has been banned, I think.
Yeah, we know a specific case where the first contact was made through PUBG, and it ended up after 2 years and the girl being actually forced to share a lot of videos, nude videos of herself. So, but the first contact was PUBG.
There was this blue whale game also.
Yeah. That led to a death.
I mean, is this coming up in schools? It's coming up in the US where kids share each other's images around and it's a thing, but is it coming up in schools much or no? It is.
What I have observed in the past years, suddenly my son has got this new chatting app, which I have never seen in my life. And I asked him, and he is there on that app with a different name, some Rick Sanchez or something. When I asked him that, is that you? And he said that, yes, that's me. I said, why are you using a different name? He said, you don't know anything about social media. Yeah. So this is how nowadays we chat. So all my classmates, we chat with different names. So now every day I check his WhatsApp and his chat just to see.
But then that's, you are there, but what I'm saying is they seem to think impersonate. Those are the things where I feel it gets blurred, right? That it's okay to impersonate and be somebody else. Yeah. It just feels okay to them, right? Yeah. That's the norm of social media. I can just be somebody else.
Yes.
So everything is going to just as an identity.
Yeah. So even if that child, if people who are doing this, I don't know, we've never got into their head. But they may also be thinking, this is not us. This is the persona that we created.
Can be there, you know what? everything can be linked with unique ID. But companies will never do it. Companies will never do it.
The profit is with it.
Profit is there.
Yeah.
So if unique ID can be compulsory for every profile making kind of thing, automatically no need to ask anything, any say anything. Everything will automate. But it is not possible. It's about business and
Yeah.
technology can do it, but profit is always right.
The name that's they're changing, they're creating a different world for them.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So why? That is the psychological perspective.
The psychological-
Because they're not maybe getting that spark from their own particular life, which they want to create in a fantasy world or something outer world or the naked world.
So in their mind, I wonder whether they even
They're giving the different names. Character names.
They do in virtual show.
Yeah, character names are different, identity.
Another area which I feel is getting neglected is the post-trauma complications. Like we talk a lot on the prevention aspects, developing communication protocols, developing messaging, pamphlets, ICs, media communications. We talk a lot on prevention aspects, awareness generation meetings and all. But what happens with the child once this incident takes place? What are the complications that the child and the family goes through? What kind of mental and psychological pressure builds up in the family? So that area is getting, not very much well explored. And we need to also find some, discussion should be on that. If this incident happens, then how we can support the child and the family, what are the rehabilitation procedures, or how we can, support the family. So both aspects needs to be, taken care of very well. Prevention and also the post-trauma complications.
And you're right, for the whole family, the families that we know that we're in contact with, and our research shows that when and not even the online perpetrator, but the spreading around the school situation, families have to move or change schools, and there can be a lot of shame for the whole family that is difficult to navigate. So it's definitely, that's a really, really great point about how you support people after the fact. It's critical too.
Yes, yeah, we can close now. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming in. Thanks, Shoini, for connecting us.
It was a good discussion.
Yeah, very good discussion.
I think this is like, very early stage. Maybe in the next 2-3 years, we'll see the worst forms of this.
Yes.
It's just beginning to
Yes,
happen.
it's just started. So let me also thank our online. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. So bye for now, and we'll keep connected.